Hi, this is Audrey.
At the same time. Week 2, technical track, stretch, and compression at Wednesday Hop, January 2019. We did frame.
Last week you talked about balance as a requirement for stretch and compression. This week we're moving on to frame, and we asked what was frame and what was connection. And we're calling frame the physical thing that you can do, and we're calling connection the way that you communicate or the forces between you.
Okay, so we started off by talking a little bit about frame, but rather than just going over like, okay, roll your shoulders back or whatever, we want you to feel what it feels like by pushing on like the wall, for example, and then pulling on each other. And then basically and you can either use another person or like a bar or something like that to really understand what it is that's happening in your body and get to know that a little bit better rather than just go, okay, squeeze. Okay.
And we said that all of stretch and compression is a conversation, so with 3 parts, just like we're talking, I initiate, there's a response like, would you like to go for a walk? That's initiating.
Sure, how should we go walk?
That's the response and acknowledgement, and then the action itself is the third thing, we go walk somewhere. So the same thing, the initiation, in this case, is a movement.
The decision is how I choose to respond to it, and the action is, in this case, was stretch.
And we can choose to ignore it, and we did some exercises on how we know when to ignore that signal or make a decision that we couldn't trust that signal because somebody was imbalanced, for example.
So we started off first by doing an exercise in which we talk about how to send and receive a request.
A movement request, in general, is pressure or tension, but it could be walking or it could be stretch, for example, and it's hard to distinguish unless you talk about the anchor point.
So the anchor point is specifically where the hands are, because that tells us where our feet should be. If the anchor point moves, my feet move. If the anchor point does not move, my feet do not move. Now, stretch is created when our center of mass changes with respect to where our feet are. Case in point, center of mass is farther away, whereas feet did not move.
If we come back together and we're trying to initiate movement instead of stretch, the anchor moves with that force. Now, you may have a hard time distinguishing the first time that you feel something, which is why you can tell, in large part, if someone intended movement or stretch by seeing how balanced you are at the end of that movement.
So that was our second exercise. We were talking about how the decision that the receiver makes can affect the initiator.
Yep, so let's say the follow is the initiator in this case. And I decide to ignore that for whatever reason. There's someone behind me or something else.
So I go, ooh, okay.
Or I decide to move. Or I decide to sit back.
Okay. And then that affects what I do as well, because maybe I wanted the leader or the responder to move in that case, but then in order to stay balanced, I have to stretch because they decided to stretch.
Yep. And the key here to distinguish, again, as a summary, is you can't tell the first time. You have to see how it worked and know how that forces compared to your baseline with what the other person expects, and then you can adjust. Then we went on to actually doing the thing, and we'll just show you the exercise. We're not going to go through all the details of it, but basically we had a 6-count pass by, and we had a couple ways of doing this. One of them was like a tiny lead at the end. The other way is we have actually some momentum going into a stretch. And then we also had stretch down at the end of that. And the important thing here is you can decide to respond to it or not, and the opposing person would also respond.
Yep. So, great job today. And next week, we're going to do more gushy things with frame and connection and redirection. Thank you so much.